Thank you very much indeed, and apologies for the change in order. Unfortunately, I had to be back up in Newcastle by tea time, and I've got a fixed train to catch, so I do apologise. I also apologise a great deal for missing this afternoon's session, and I would dearly have loved to have been able to take part in that in the survivorship session. But what I would like to do, really on behalf of my many European colleagues, is to talk about the European Survivorship Passport project, or SURPASS as it's called now. Now, I should state right at the beginning, a lot of the slides, in fact the majority of the slides here, have been borrowed straight from my colleague Riccardo Haupt from Genoa in Italy, who has been the main driver of this. I heard Riccardo first talking about this concept in 2007, and he has worked absolutely tirelessly to lead this project, and he's done an absolutely grand job. He knows there's still a lot of work to be done, but he has done a superb job. So he's the one person I'm really going to mention by name to thanks and to credit him for a lot of these slides. So what I'm going to talk about is what is the passport. I'm going to do a little bit of talking about how does it work and what does it look like. I'm going to mention about its link to long-term follow-up guidelines, which is an area that I'm strongly involved in. Its advantages in providing information, the fact that it can actually provide two sides to this story, both the care side and research. Move on to a bit about the next steps, and then specifically think about some of our challenges but also opportunities in the UK. So the first thing is just to remember that in the UK we had the National Cancer Survivorship Initiative in the first few years of this decade. And that actually provided 10 key principles and recommendations for basically survivorship in paediatric cancer survivors. And number 5 of this was that all cancer survivors should expect to be given a treatment summary and a care plan at the end of the treatment. So that's what the passport is, but actually it's a lot more than just that. It is a treatment summary and care plan, but it's got a lot of other functionality. So this is really just a slide to remind us that our primary target audience is actually, it's not just children who are survivors, it's really young adults. I think that's, if you like, the real growing area. Most childhood cancer survivors at the moment are actually young adult age. And I assume I can show that. So this is really an important target group for us. So going back to the question of what is the passport, well, it's a document that can be given to the individual patient, ideally at the end of treatment, but it could be given later if needs be. It can be either paper or, if you like, internet electronic based. There's an important principle of using plain, understandable language. It will contain the cancer history and the treatment information, so your treatment summary, and it will provide advice and guidance on the recommended follow-up, looking for surveillance of potential late side effects in survivors on a very individual level. So that's your care plan. And the idea is that this is going to be translatable into all European languages. And without going into too much detail, just a little bit about the structure. It's going to rely on a database. So basically all these elements will be built in, and most of these elements ideally can come from electronic databases, but they may have to be supplemented in some cases by human input. That will that will then be allied to existing and emerging long-term follow-up guidelines that are being produced by PanCare SurfUp, which is a European project that's being led by the PanCare Group, and by the International Guidelines Harmonisation Group, which is a worldwide initiative. And Kathy mentioned Expo-RNet earlier, will facilitate this as well. And that will then lead to the production of what in the first place is going to be a web-based patient passport, but which can be given to a survivor in PDF form or on paper as well. And this is basically hosted by Seneca, which is a very large Italian software company with loads and loads of projects in healthcare. So they're very familiar with this sort of work. And this is just to give you an idea of the complexity of data that will go into it. So you'll have, if you like, disease data about the actual illness and about its characteristics at presentation, relapse if necessary, and then all the different sorts of treatment chemotherapy, radiotherapy, surgery, stem cell transplants, and so on, then leading to recommendations for follow-up. And the idea is that this is going to be not just a one-off thing, but it's going to be a lifetime resource that is available for the survivor and will follow them through at various stages, hopefully just this stage for the majority of our survivors. But if necessary, with further information to be added in the event of a relapse and further treatment as well, but then basically building into a lifelong survivor passport that will be of help to them. And the idea is, as already mentioned, that different sources of electronic data in hospital or, in some cases, national-based electronic health records will feed into this and will allow production of the ultimate passport, perhaps with some supplementation from clinician input, from data manager input as well, although in the ideal world we would hope that that would be minimised, but I doubt that we'll avoid it just yet, particularly not in the UK. And then this is actually data that was shared at the recent PanCare Survivorship European Conference in Brussels. And this was a young adult survivor who actually got up and told us her story and allowed her information to be shown to all of us, and she's therefore given her permission for it to be shown again today. And basically you can see that it provides information about her illness and then information about her treatment, her chemotherapy, her radiotherapy. So that's a treatment summary, but that then allows the production of recommendations for surveillance in the future. So, for example, breast cancer screening for the risk of a secondary breast cancer having had radiotherapy to her chest area, or cardiac screening because she's had potentially cardiotoxic treatment. And the idea is that this guides her and her carers in providing that form of surveillance. Now, not all the guidelines are yet available, and again, that she is aware of this. There will be other guidelines that would become available over the next few years, and which should be added to that as a list of something that would be an important surveillance for her to have. And this particular survivor is aware of that at the moment, but it will be added formally into the passport as we go along. Now, why involve guidelines in this? Well, guidelines basically are an important means of ensuring high quality long-term follow-up care, and they provide the evidence basis for that. And the important thing about guidelines is they look and do a systematic review of the evidence and then make recommendations that are partly based on evidence but also based on what survivors are telling us is important as well. And the idea of those is that in the long run you will reduce morbidity or even mortality due to late effects. And you saw some worrying but really important figures earlier about the risks of late effects and the impact that they can cause in that pie chart that was shown us about an hour ago. So guidelines, if we spot these problems at an early stage, by the help of guidelines that are directed our follow-up, we can reduce or prevent some of those problems. And we can also use healthcare resources better as well. And this is just to give you an idea of the range of guidelines that are being produced. These are pretty much, nearly all of these are in progress at the moment. There's one or two that are just about to start. And then the remaining topics are actually covered down here. So pretty much any important late effect is being covered by a guidelines initiative at the moment across Europe and internationally. And what these guidelines then tell us is they give us recommendations, different strengths of recommendations. So a green recommendation says this is really important. We have the evidence, we know that this particular surveillance should be performed. And then you get to weaker ones with yellow and orange where there is less strong evidence, but still some evidence, and strong expert opinion that these surveillance investigations should be performed as well. And then there's some where actually maybe a surveillance recommendation has been recommended in the past, but it's believed that actually, if you look at the evidence carefully, it probably causes more harm than benefit in terms of either unnecessary investigations causing psychological distress, or even unnecessary investigations that could themselves cause problems or lead to unnecessary biopsies and so on. So sometimes there's a recommendation not to do a particular surveillance recommendation. Obviously, these would all be discussed with the individual survivor, and ultimately the individual survivor and their clinician together could actually make the decision that is right for them. I mentioned information. Now obviously this is written in Italian, but basically this is information about cardiac and breast cancer screening recommendations. And if you open that out, just to say that these will be available on the website, which will be up and coming within a few months. If you actually then open that out, you'll see the cardiac one, which we hope is written in plain language. A lot of people have taken a lot of care to produce this in plain language, explaining what are the effects of cancer treatments on the heart, and what are we looking for when we are suggesting screening surveillance investigations. And then, having done that, we're asking we're actually providing information about what are the most appropriate tests to perform, when, what about aspects such as, can a survivor do physical activity? And the answer is by and large yes. What about if a survivor is pregnant? And do they need any other checks as well? So trying to provide a fairly comprehensive but straightforward to read set of information. And then basically similar information, for example, for breast cancer screening. It's being written at the moment for female fertility issues and male fertility issues, and many others are following. And then the other thing to say is that this, as I say, is going to be available on the internet, and it's going to be translatable and is going to be translated into lots of different European languages. There's a lot of people out there who are involved in this project who are already doing those translations. And then it'll be given in a nice presentable folder, but it will also be available electronically. Now, this passport, there's two sides to this, as I mentioned earlier, and what we really hope is that it is going to empower survivors. We hope it's going to facilitate transition as they move into adulthood and move to adult-based carers. This is going to be an important way of transferring information. And we hope that it's actually going to allow more appropriate use of not just NHS, but across Europe, of health service resources. Because if you actually focus your attentions on the surveillance investigations that really matter, what are the important late effects to look for where, if you look with this particular investigation, you can make a difference, and what are the ones where actually that particular investigation is probably not helpful. If you focus on the ones that do help, then you use resources better. But then the other thing is that it's, we hope, going to be able to help us with research in the future. As you'll see in the next couple of slides, we hope there's going to be a two-way stream of information here, so that survivors, in conjunction with their healthcare teams, can provide information back. And that might, for example, help lead to earlier detection of a new emerging late effect. It might help us to identify particular risk factors. Is a particular treatment or a particular dose of a certain drug a risk factor? And all in all, we hope it can help us to move to the situation where we're not just curing survivors, but we're curing them with minimum toxicity. And this is really just to illustrate. This is similar to the slide that was shown earlier, but we're here talking about a two-way flow of information. So what are the next steps? Well, a really crucial step, obviously, is to implement the passport in as many institutions and countries as we can. The Austrian Health Service has already decided that it is going to implement the passport nationwide. And there's strong hope that's going to happen in the Netherlands as well. And then many individual institutions in these countries are extremely interested and hopefully going to do this as well. And I think the idea was to do as Austria have done, to actually build it in to a national healthcare delivery plan and system. I think if we can get it involved in transition programs, then that's going to be a really important use, and that's going to help transition and exchange of information. And then the last thing that I've just been talking about the last couple of minutes, is we are hoping in future work to be able to develop an integrated mobile app using your phones or whatever that's going to allow information to flow the other way from the survivor to collect information using sort of standardized criteria, so it's actually useful information and that it allows the survivors to give their feedback, obviously with appropriate information, safeguards and with appropriate data protection, which does come on as a point in the next couple of slides. So really in conclusion, this is before we get on to the UK bit, the passport really is going to provide a standard of care for long-term follow-up, and we believe it's going to be very useful for transition as well. We think it's going to provide consistent and shared follow-up recommendations across Europe, so that's going to give equality of care across Europe, and that's why this is so important for European paediatric oncology. And this project has very much come from ENCA, and Kathy talked about that earlier, so huge buy-in from the ENCA project, from PSYOP Europe. This is really a European project for the future. And we hope this is going to lead to prospective, ongoing, forwards-looking collection of data to help us in the future. But what about the UK, just for the last 3 or 4 slides? I think there's going to be substantial challenges for us in Europe. I think the costs will be an issue. We don't yet know what those costs will be. It will probably depend on what resources you've already got available in your particular centre. There's going to be IT issues, there's going to be data protection issues, there's going to be data transfer issues with lots of different NHS software systems for storing data, and we really need to work hard on that. Inevitably, I think there's going to sometimes be a reluctance to change. Some people will say, we've got a treatment summary and care plan, why do we need to use this? So, one challenge for us, I think, is going to be to demonstrate why this should be a priority. I think there's opportunities. I think this is going to be a better way of informing survivors and families what to anticipate in the future. That's one of the biggest things that we hear back from families, is they don't know what to expect in the future. We hope that this is going to empower survivors. I think it's going to, future work here can give us the opportunity to demonstrate the benefits. The fact that this could be updateable, the fact that it links with guidelines, it can provide an easy way or an easier way of allowing patient-reported outcomes to be recorded. And as I've already mentioned, hopefully it can allow us to detect emerging late side effects at an earlier stage than is currently happening. So how can we go about trying to promote this within the UK? Well, I think first thing, and maybe this is just a start today, is to promote visibility of the passport to survivors and carers, and indeed everybody involved. And I think charities and advocacy groups and societies, CCLG and many others can help us there. We can be providing articles about this. For example, the various magazines, Contact Magazine, things on the website or various other web forums could help us to increase the visibility. It can be incorporated into presentations, into education days. And maybe we can do a pilot study to actually see what it would look like in individual centres. And actually, moving on from that, a Horizon 2020 application, which is currently under review, coming from PanCare, called PanCare AllOutcomes, has got one particular facet to that, which is involving Leeds, Genoa, where this system was developed from Ricardo Haupt, and also 3 other European centres. There, if this is successful, they will collect information about what facilitates or obstructs implementation of the passport in those individual centres. They will identify what the data challenges are. They'll build an inventory of all the different software systems that the passport would need to link to and look at what the issues would be. They would actually set up an engagement meeting to launch it in their individual centres. And then having done that, they would look at what are the effects of its implementation in those centres, both for survivors and for the healthcare professionals. So I think for the UK, I think the first step is visibility. I think we've got to think hard about what the advantages are and then attempt to demonstrate those. There will be obstacles. I think we've got to work hard to overcome those, and we've got to demonstrate feasibility. But I strongly believe, and my European colleagues, and Ricardo is particularly enthusiastic about it, not just for the obvious reasons that he's built it, but he's been enthusiastic about this for a decade. I think there will be great advantages to this, and I think it's our challenge for the next few years is to bring this into UK practice. So lots of people to thank, primarily Ricardo working on behalf of ENCA, but with a lot of support from all these other European organisations. So thank you.